great panel. We have, I'll introduce them quickly and give you a short bio. They're going to do a presentation, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions. So quickly, we have Leo Sterilakis. He's Executive Vice President of JSI, which is a full-service consulting firm, yada, yada, yada. We have Rob West, and he's with CoBank. He's Senior Vice President, and he's the lender in the room. And we have Bernie Arnson. He's with Pivot, the Pivot Group, and they're a marketing firm. He also does the Telecompetitor, which I read just about every day, I will say. If y'all don't read it, I highly recommend it. But we'll get started, and we'll get kicked off with you, Leo.
Am I on? Am I on? Can everybody hear me? Back row, can you hear? Yeah. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. And as Stephen says, thank you for being here. We really don't want to be here. We'd like to be outside doing something fun, but we appreciate you sticking with us and participating in this session. This session is brought to you by the Associate Member Advisory Council, which does a lot of training and educational efforts for NTCA at these meetings, at the regionals, and so forth. And I appreciate you coming, and AMAC appreciates you coming as well. What we're going to be talking about today is monetizing your network. And we're going to cover a few things. I'm going to cover things from a regulatory business perspective. Rob's going to talk about how bankers view the industry and monetizing the network. And then Bernie gets the fun stuff. He gets to talk about technologies and actually how you're going to do that and make it worthwhile for everyone. So let's kick it off. I have here revisiting change. If you all have been, unless you've been living under a rock for the past 2 years, you know about the FCC order that was released in November that substantially changes the way we do business. It changes our traditional USF, which now becomes a CAF fund, Connect America Fund. It changes intercarrier compensation, access charges, and it hits a number of other things that I'll talk about quickly. Because I think it's important to understand that the investments we historically have made, we may not get a return or get that money back on those investments. And that should color the way we look at new investments and how we're going to monetize what we put into the ground. The order, as you know, shifts money from the traditional USF fund to this thing called the CAF. The CAF is sized at $2 billion for our industries, a $4 billion fund in total, but $2 billion is allocated to companies just like yourself, rate of return carriers. In capping that, they've also done a number of things. They're saying we are not going to continue to pay for things that we believe are over and above a reasonable cost. And their definition of reasonable cost is this thing called a regression analysis. And in the regression analysis, they're going to look at, they're going to have 10 silos. They're going to create 10 buckets of companies. And those buckets will be based on access lines, on density, on geographic location, things like that. And then they've chosen, I think it's 21 accounts out of the Part 32 system that relate to your investment and the expenses related to that investment. And they're going to stratify everything, and they're going to limit everybody to the 90th percentile. So they're going to go up to the top 90% of companies that are spending. If you exceed what those 90% of the companies do, you get no recovery. That money is actually recycled back through the system. So that is really going to make you question how much you can afford to spend in your network before you exceed that 90%. And that 90% gets recalculated every year. So what ultimately is going to happen mathematically is you're going to go to the middle. You're essentially going to go to a 50 percentile for everybody for investment and expense recovery. What they've also done is they've put a cap on USF. The cap is $250 per subscriber per month, which is a lot of money. But believe it or not, there's about 26 companies that exceed that. They just got cut. So a lot of their money that they used to get in that support is no longer there. They also eliminate what what they call the safety net additive. The safety net additive is if you invest more than 114% of your total plan and service, you were allowed to pull money out of this fund to help support that additional investment, which was to the betterment of the network, the betterment of your customers. It was also based on investment and access lines. They've cut that program. That money is no longer going to be available after 2013. And some companies are getting $4 and $5 and $6 million a year in safety net additive support, which will no longer be there. So they've done a lot of these things that really make us question how we're going to get our investment back. There's about 40 to 45% of the investment in total in the industry that is not yet depreciated. In other words, it's still on your books, and theoretically, in your rate base, you're supposed to earn on. With these regression analysis, it's questionable as to whether you're going to recover that money, over what period, and if at all. So we have a lot of thinking to do. So our existing investments in question, so we have to look at how we approach new investments. Well, what we're here today is to talk about how our network has to be monetized to more than historically pay for itself. We can't rely on USF, we can't rely on access to support the fiber we're putting into the ground and the other things we're doing with our network. We're actually going to have to create and sell services over that facility to contribute more to the investment requirements and the requirements for operating expenses. That's what today's focus is going to be about. When we talk about the network as the most valuable thing you have, it's valued at every level of your operation. First of all, when we value companies to either buy or sell or merge, it's valued on your cash flow. Your cash flow is totally generated by the services that you sell over your network. The identity of you in your service area as to the services you provide, the amount of broadband speed you have, whether you do cable, anything else, is defined by your network. So it is an extremely valuable asset that needs to be expanded and needs to be built upon. I forgot to say this in the earlier session, but networks are very valuable. These statewide networks and other long-haul networks, they're very valuable. In 2010, from December 2010 to now, there was 10 deals that exceeded the number of telephone company deals, and companies going out and buying these networks because they see the value in these transport facilities. Cloud computing, which Bernie will talk about, there was 12 cloud deals in that same period of time. Again, everything's going to data, everything's going to the management of networks and the transport of those facilities. So monetizing these networks that are very valuable to you right now, and you can create more value out of them, is going to be what we're going to have to do. And there's going to be ways to do it, which Bernie will spend a lot of time talking about. The leveraging of your network is nothing new. We've been doing it for a while. Things like shared head ends, shared switching, network operating centers, which is NOCs, statewide networks. We've been doing that for a while. I don't want to say the problem, but the reality is most of those things have been done to enhance our own operations, though. When we develop statewide networks, we look at a map of the companies in the state, and they see that 80% of the geographic area is covered with fiber. How are you going to fill those 20% pieces? So they form partnerships. They do that investment either individually or as a group. But it really is for transport within the service areas, within the state. There's very few states that actually tie their networks together. I think there's 36 statewide networks that act autonomously and really do not interconnect very well or enough. Why wouldn't we do that? Why wouldn't we leverage those facilities for things well beyond what we need? To go to backhaul transport for wireless carriers, things like that. So we're going to talk about that. But this is nothing new. We just need to figure out how to expand and enhance it. Some of the ways we're going to do that is coordinate these statewide networks. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to go to one source, Verizon, let's say, and Verizon says, listen, I need this capacity in these 10 states, and that one source can go ahead and coordinate that, get it priced, get it under contract, everybody benefits. Cloud-based services, I won't talk too much about that, but Bernie's going to talk about that. But everything is moving to the cloud as a cheaper way of running your data networks. Why have the servers on your books in your facilities? Why have the software on those servers when you can go to a location where someone's already made that investment and just lease it from them or rent it from them? System backup and server housing is very much similar. Again, why have all that stuff if we can go to a common point with an interconnected network with plenty of broadband capacity? Excuse me. Why wouldn't we go ahead and do that? Regional, national NOCs, home management and home monitoring. Bernie's going to give an example of this. I pay $49.95, I think it is, for security management. I have an app on my phone, an app on my iPad, an app on my computer where I can look at who's in my house, turn the system off and on. I've got a camera. I haven't hooked it up yet, but I can control my lights. I can control my thermostats, and that's valuable to me. I'm on the road a lot. My wife might not be home. My kids are out. Make sure that the lights are off. Make sure that the thermostats are turned down if they don't have to be up. So that's a value to me, and I'm willing to pay for it. And Bernie's going to give you some examples, but that's a very profitable business. And it utilizes the network you've already built and the customers you already have. Consolidated operating systems. Those who have heard me speak before, is this concept of a federation or working more closely together to consolidate your operations like switching, like billing, like accounting, like management, and all those things. We're going to have to do more of that, specifically how it relates to our network. We can leverage so much off the capacity that we have, because I will tell you, in your networks that you have today, that you've invested millions of dollars, you're not using near the capacity that you can. Same thing with switching. The switches you have, you can switch many more calls than you're switching. Same thing with your billing systems. They can handle many more monthly bills than you're pushing them through. So we have capacity, we just have to figure out how to monetize it. Managed IP services, again, hosted IP, PBX for your local businesses. It's a very attractive suite of services that your local businesses can use without having to invest in a lot of infrastructure for a Centrex system in your office. So all those are initiatives that we have to look at and figure out how to monetize and how to bring value to your company. Here we go again. Oh, there it is. So you can do this through an individual effort. You can do it through a partnership. You can do it through these federations or centralized management companies. And you may do a little bit of all that or just one specifically. Your business plan will ultimately dictate what you do and how you set it up. Your state of your network, the state of the people you're going to interconnect with, the people who are helping you develop these services, all those things will help to contribute how you decide to structure it, whether it's an individual effort, a partnership, or some sort of centralized management services. I will caution you that you have to be very diligent in how you establish these businesses and how you establish these services. I have been astounded to find out the decision-making process when you ask companies, you jumped into this service, why'd you jump into it? What was your goal? And I'm not sure they can really tell me, other than the fact they're losing a lot of money on a monthly basis. Is your return, is it for financial return purposes or provision of services? And you really need to understand that. And I'll tell you, as cooperatives, for the most part, I think who's in here, you're doing it for provision of services. You're doing it because there's a need to be filled, and you have the capacity to fill it. And I think that's fine. However, you have to have a component of the financial return included in that, because at some point it will bankrupt you if you're not getting money and cash flow and margin out of those businesses. We've got a client that's losing $4.5 million a year in their cable operation. A lot of money. But when they were getting a lot of settlements and a lot of USF, okay, you can tolerate that. That's no longer going to be the case. So we got to make sure that whatever we set up for whatever services we're going to launch, that we understand why we're doing it and what the end game is. What is the return expectation? How much? Over what period of time? The ultimate goal, obviously, as I said in the prior slide, is going to dictate the structure that you set up. You know, the wants and needs of an individual company will be different than the wants and needs of a partnership or a federation. So you really need to understand all those components so you can understand how to set up that system. I put this up here because I don't think we're very realistic about what creates a successful business plan and a successful launching of a service or the failure of it. And so I put a few reasons up here, and these can go either way. They're the reason you succeed or the reason you fail. The first is realistic expectations and assumptions. If you size your potential market wrong, if you put your pricing wrong, if you don't understand your expense structure and your investment structure related to these services, you're going to blow your business model. So in a short period of time, you're going to find out that there's no way you'll ever make money. Or, conversely, you're going to find out that you're going to perform very well and it's going to contribute to your bottom line. I think security is one of those issues. But the point is when you go to your boards, when you go to your bankers, you better have a business plan that's realistic and you have a really good chance of meeting those assumptions. The second thing, the ability to execute your plan, I would say that's probably the number one reason for failure. The planning is great, but you couldn't pull the trigger. You didn't have the right staff, which goes to the next bullet. You were overzealous in your timing. You didn't know how to manage it once it was developed. We did an acquisition that it was a nice plan because this company was going to go in and build the CLEC in their neighboring town. Instead, they had the opportunity to buy the town, so they bought the town. And so we figured out how much was it cost to reinvest in the network and rebuild the plant and so forth. This was for cable operations. And it worked great until the plant manager of the telephone company decided, instead of using aerial cable, we're going to directionally bore it. $1.5 million difference in the capital plan. They also decided, instead of having 2 techs that were running that operation with 2 vehicles, they got 6 techs. And each of them got a new bucket truck. Well, that killed the plan. That was a failure to execute to the plan. And that company is now losing a lot of money on an annual basis for that property. We talked about staffing. Proper structure and capital resources. Rob will touch on this. You have to have a very good idea of where your debt money is going to come from to do this and where your equity is going to come from. Either the mixture, it's not going to be all debt, but it certainly could be all equity. You need to understand the ramifications of that on your plan and on your return expectations. We recently completed an acquisition of a CLEC in one of the states we serve. The CLEC got broadband stimulus funding. They got about $6 million. They, however, did not have the ability to come up with matching equity through the broadband stimulus plan. So they had to sell their CLEC to a neighboring telephone company, which was one of our clients, because they could not execute on the plan because they didn't have their equity in place. Why would you go for their broadband loan if you couldn't come up with the equity? Why would NTCA give you the broadband loan if you couldn't prove you had the equity? But again, it was a failure to execute because they didn't have the right capital resources in place. Proper market and competitive analysis. You know, if you're the 4th person to enter the market with a lookalike service, you're probably not going to do very well. If your customers are on the lower end of the economic scale and you have a high-price service, you're probably not going to do very well. You really need to understand who you're selling to, who your competition is, have reasonable expectations as to penetration and to pricing and everything we've talked about so far, so that you can make sure that the plan is possible to be achievable. Otherwise, you might as well not even do it. And we're talking about all this again in the confines of how are we going to make more money off our networks. You are going to develop services. You have the capacity to leverage what you already have on the ground, and there's plenty of examples of things you can do today that already exist that you're going to overlay on your network. There's going to be partnerships you can form that can do these services on a much broader scale. The thing we have to think about is because of technology, because of broadband, because of the infrastructure coordination, your customers can be 5 states away. They don't have to be in your service area. We need to look at the world as our market, not just our local service area, because technology allows us to do that. You can switch on an IP switch. You can switch for companies 5 states away. You can provide video signals for states that are 4 states away. You just need to do this so that you understand it's much broader than your local service area, and therefore there's much more opportunity to sell services to a much broader audience. My clicker's not clicking. Hit that page down, man. Thank you. So you need to ask yourselves when you're in. You okay? Sorry, don't go too far back there. I don't know if there's a doctor in the house. You know, as we enter our management teams and we go to our boardrooms, we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do in the next 3 to 5 years to help ensure our survival? How are we going to replace the money we're losing? And I'm assuming all of you have a pretty good idea now of what that number is based on the regression analysis. I will tell you that there may be some people that aren't impacted in the first couple of years, but everybody's impacted in the long term in a negative way. So we need to understand what that is and figure out how we're going to replace that divot with new revenue sources. How do we meet the service expectations of our customers? Your customers are very intelligent about all of the new technologies. They want the new technologies. They use the new technologies. We're just going to give you some statistics. Let's be the facilitator of the use of that technology. Let's give them what they want. Can we avoid creating the haves and have-nots? I have this discussion quite often with our cooperative clients, with their boards. The answer is no. You are going to create haves and have-nots. And the dirty little secret is we've done it for years. Anyone who had a wireless partnership, when you built out that wireless partnership, you only hit the interstates. You might have hit the downtown area if it was dense enough, but there's many of these partnerships that still exist that do not serve 100% of the service area because it's not economically feasible. You have to put a tower up. You have to put the electronics. Let's say $250,000 per tower. You have to have probably 400 or 500 people off that one tower in a radius of 20 miles, depending on the topography, to support just that investment. Forget the operating cost, just that investment. It just doesn't happen very easily. So we've created have and have-nots for a while. What we have to be able to accept is a concept. Not everybody's going to have the same service at the same level. You may, instead of offering cable service, digital cable services to 100% of the area, you may go ahead and buy them a dish to those outliers. Instead of giving high-speed broadband, you may do it on a wired basis. You may do it wirelessly for those outliers because it's not economically feasible to invest to go out to that 20-mile loop. How do we avoid being the carrier of last resort? In our enacting legislation in 1932, we're defined as a carrier of last resort. We have an obligation to serve. Unfortunately, we're becoming what they say we are. We are becoming a carrier of last resort. We're going to have to maintain networks that are very expensive to maintain to serve a diminishing number of customers on that network because they're going to wireless, they're going to the cable TV system that's offering voice. We have to avoid being that carrier of last resort. We will lose lines. We will lose customers, no doubt. But we can add other types of customers and other types of revenues through leveraging our network and creating services of value that our current customers would like to have, as well as customers across the country, if not in the next state. Don't just sit there. All right, that's my last one. I'm going to turn it over to Rob, and he's going to talk about money, our favorite subject.
Good afternoon. Let me add my thanks to NTCA and the AMAC committee for putting this group together and having a discussion on this particular topic, monetizing the network. And And as the banker in the room, I'm going to take I'm going to build on what Leo talked about a little bit and give it to you from a banker's perspective in that when bankers look at your business and what are the prospects for your business, and because I'm potentially going to give you money, and ultimately I'm going to be, if I do, I'm going to be a stakeholder in business, and I have a stake in whether you can execute or not. And we're at a time which this industry probably in the last 50 years has never seen. Some of you can't access capital today. Some of you can't even sell if you wanted to sell your company, you probably couldn't sell it, or maybe not sell it. So this is the first time probably in 50 years that companies in the telephone business, rural telephone industry, may not have access, and if they needed to liquidate an asset, may not be able to, because the other side doesn't see value in it. So what I'm going to talk about today is, from my vantage point, where are the capital providers? How do we look at it? Do we see growth? Do we understand how you're monetizing the business? And do we understand the strategies associated with it? I guess what goes along with that is what do we think is successful, or what makes it, from our vantage point, what makes things successful? And real life examples. Back to the successful thing, we talked about this morning, and I wanted to make it a little clearer this afternoon. Bankers pretty much appreciate the fact that you have end user customers or homes that you're connected to, but increasingly what we care about is the number of connections. Sometimes we call them RGUs, revenue generating units. And it doesn't necessarily have to be to other humans. It could be business to business. It could be just monitoring services. It could be a lot of different things. Because what we're looking for is how many things you're connected to, are you making money on those things, and is it actually cash flowing? But before we jump into that, I'm going to go with real life examples. These are all co-bank customers, and they're all public companies. And I know your first thing you might be thinking is that, well, how do these companies have any relevance to what I do? And I would contend that they do. A lot of them used to be smaller companies, but they're struggling with the same things that you might be struggling with. They're trying to differentiate themselves. They're trying to be more valuable to their end users. They're trying to broaden their customer base, broaden their product base, and they've chosen many different paths to do that. Some geographic, some they want to go out and buy new businesses. They're probably doing both. So we see some of these companies have converted from traditional telephone companies to maybe even cable TV companies, or they've instead of acquiring more telephone companies, they decided to acquire cable companies because they brought them some additional value, broadened their footprint. Increasingly, the businesses are very similar. There's a lot of fiber in both. They can tie the networks to the assets to a backbone, and as Leo referenced, you can backhaul it from pretty far and actually distribute it from pretty far away. Increasingly, the fiber transport business is an area that CoBank has found a lot of opportunity and seen a lot of capital go into it. So, in the RLEC world, there's I think we decided 34, 36 statewide networks that the RLEC industry is predominantly associated with, but there's also a lot of others out there that maybe are in the same area, maybe they compete with you. They might be consolidators, they might have bought regional networks and are combining them together. They might have built a lot of that. But what they're after is they're after the small businesses, the medium businesses, the larger businesses. They want to tie towers together. And so a lot of different things that aren't really residential based. They're looking at enhancing their business by going after creating networks and creating business plans that target business users. And increasingly, Leo made reference to the cloud side of it, but data storage, data management, hosting services is increasingly a big deal. And so we see a lot of data center transactions, and in fact, CoBank never really, until recently, hadn't financed data centers on a standalone basis. A lot of our customers were in that business, and we financed it kind of indirectly by financing the entire enterprise, but more and more, we're looking at financing standalone data centers because there's a lot of growth and a lot of demand for those services. I'd also contend, these are big companies and public companies, as I said, But I can go through our portfolio at the bank and give you smaller examples of same private companies, commercial companies, and cooperatives that are doing these exact same things. Maybe not on a larger scale, but they're certainly doing it within their state and probably beyond their state in the neighboring states around them, depending on where they find opportunities. Now I'm going to talk about our portfolio. This hopefully gives you some insight into how we see the business over the last 12, 13 years. It's not contiguous. I dropped a few years out, but basically this covers the last 12 years. I've been at the bank 16 years. When I got to the bank, we were pretty much exclusively a telephone RLEC lender and a wireless lender. We probably saw our number of companies we dealt with in the telephone business probably peak at about 180 to 190 different companies. You can see there in 2000 we had 63 wireless companies. At the peak, we probably had 90 to 100 wireless companies, and most all of them were associated with a rural telephone company, because that's just how the licenses were sent out by the FCC, and then they were billed out in either joint ventures or standalone. So over time, you can see that the RLEC business has really changed dramatically for us. Consolidation's had a big impact on that, and capital providers like consolidation when business is growing. Because usually it's on our terms. We can pick good operations, and we can see the consolidation, and that usually means more loans and other things for us. But increasingly, we found that the business continues to get harder to lend to, and we have to almost pick winners and losers in our world. Where 5 years ago, 10 years ago, almost everybody was a winner. Anybody came to the door, it was kind of like coming to the loan window, happy to give you a loan. That's not true anymore. So the landscape's changing from a capital provider's perspective in terms of where they're willing to put their capital. You can see that we historically had not lent to the cable industry much, but when they just started deploying telecom services, broadband, and building more fiber in their networks and using that fiber for transport, we found it more pretty viable or pretty interesting and economical to lend money to. So we can see that portfolio has grown for us over the years. You can see just like the RLEC business, the wireless industry has declined. And really the kind of the success, you look at the commonalities in there, those remaining 25 wireless companies, is the vast majority are companies that received most of their licenses they have back in the late 80s, build them out, added to them over time, but their cost is relatively low in terms of being in the wireless business. So that's kind of a commonality why those companies still exist and are still finding success, because as a lot of us know, that if you've been in the wireless business in the last few years, it's very, very competitive, very challenging. Your traditional revenue streams of direct revenue, roaming, and some USF have really been tightened up over the years, and it's really turned into a tough business. And back to what I mentioned on the previous slide, one of the areas we've seen a lot of opportunity, a lot of development, and probably have, our view is probably the best in terms of the prospects for the future, is in the transport business. And you can see we went from small exposure, predominantly the state networks, to about 27 different companies. The vast majority of those, we call them CLECs, but we say anything with a competitive component to it is a kind of a CLEC, and so that's why it gets kind of labeled that in the banking, world. But so that includes not only the kind of the state networks that you might be involved with, but it also includes a lot of other independent companies that are either building or acquiring regional fiber networks. So what are we looking for in terms of monetizing? And the things that we look for, you got to have a high quality network. Leo made reference to that. Most of you do have a high quality network. I'd be very shocked if someone would say something different. The question is that how you attacking the marketplace? What's your customer base? How's it shifting? Is it shifting more towards small business, medium business? And it doesn't have to necessarily be shifting away from consumers, but it probably naturally is. And the margin is probably shifting away from the consumer business to a more commercial business or small business. But how do you leverage a lot of the assets you have, your reputation, the people you have, the systems you have and the joint ventures you have. That's where the capital provider comes in. That's what he wants to know from you in terms of trying to determine the prospects, your prospects, would I want to be a stakeholder in that business? And these are key components. And a lot of you probably have pretty good businesses there. And the question is are you maximizing the assets you have? And again, I put joint ventures up there. A lot of times if it's a seasoned joint venture, we'd like to see dividends coming out of that and benefits. I know you get some cost benefits from it, but we also like to see you getting some growth benefits and dividend benefits out of that. If you're not, then then we would probably question what the long-term game plan is or strategy is in terms of maintaining an interest in that particular partnership. So again, I talked a little bit. We talked about diversity, I guess, in a roundabout way. These are the kind of things bankers look at. Again, I'm looking at a number of connections you might have. Video. I understand video is a tough business. Video is, if you don't have scale in that business, probably wouldn't advocate you be in that business. But there's other ways to get in it. You can facilitate video. As Leo said, you can even, if it's a necessity, you can even work with some satellite companies. And I know that some RLX are out there working with satellite companies to at least get a commission off that, a servicing fee. You might even be able to enhance it with some over-the-top technology to make that user experience much more valuable. Fiber transport's critical in my mind. Data centers is a growing business. All have central offices. Question is I'm guessing, at least in our experience, is that those central offices, your switches equipment's a lot smaller, your utilization of those central offices is probably down, and so there's probably plenty of floor space that can potentially be retooled to provide some kind of data center or hosted services for your service territory, or even beyond your service territory. I'll let Bernie's going to talk about other services, and I won't delve into that. Again, we don't really care so much what you're selling, as long as you're selling something and it's cash flow positive. For expansion, we see expansion all the time. Expansion is predominantly done by acquisition, but that doesn't necessarily have to be that way. Sometimes acquisition is better because you're taking a competitor out. There's probably a lot of costs you can take out. You can, if you have a strong team, you could bring those costs back and eliminate the cost of what you acquired and take it on your shoulders in your primary operation. Certainly building it, and certainly in new technologies like fiber transport and data centers, probably build more than you're going to acquire. But times are coming to the point where you can probably acquire in that area as well. And if the first two kind of feed into the third bullet there is that sometimes geographic diversity is a big critical as well. We've seen a lot of companies choose to not only get bigger and diversify, but geographic diversification is important. And it could be for various reasons. For example, we had a California customer that one of the reasons were they wanted to get out from the regulatory environment and the labor environment of the state they were in, and found other states to be more advantageous, and they could balance their workforces more effectively that made where they currently were operating more valuable. Again, the partnerships, I can't chime in enough on where Leo was coming with from that. I think that I understand some of the companies in this room are small. The rural telephone industry has some small companies. They potentially might not be able to do it all 100%. This industry is very well known for banding together, creating opportunities, joint ventures that can benefit everybody on the cost side. And the challenge is making sure you're getting a good return on the revenue and cash flow, and then ultimately the dividend side and value side. Challenges to monetizing options. I mean, I think some of the stuff is self-explanatory. I think one of the first things is, when we see our customers coming through with what they think from their regression analysis, is that well, let me back up. We saw 126 companies that are going to be impacted, probably that potentially may be impacted. Most of them have worked with themselves and with their consultants and figured out that to some level they've got to kind of pin down, and they've come to us and said, look, a handful of them have, and we're pretty fortunate so far. It is only a handful, but we're not really 100% sure. But the handful that have come to us and said, look, we think, based upon our regression analysis, that by 2013 or 2014, our cash flow streams are going to be changed dramatically. So, you know, the first step is that they'll want to appeal, they'll want to wait and see what's going to happen. But from a banker's perspective, you know, we're not thinking they're going to get much latitude in terms of how things are currently laid out and how we anticipate them to be laid out. So the next step is, what are you going to do about it? You know, are you going to sit there and just try to be the same old company you've always been? Probably not. So in step 2 process is that let's start looking at the business and can you cut costs? Where are you going to cut costs? My friends up here don't like some of my comments here in terms of the consultants. You might not like the director's reference, but every business, when it declines, can't keep the same old things that it has historically used. If you have less customers, you might need less of a few other things. And you know, we're a cooperative bank, and we're going to go through this ourselves. We just completed a big merger. Our board mushroomed from 20 people to nearly 40 people, but we have a plan in place that 40 will be between 22 and 25 in a 2-year time frame. You have to take those steps, and they're not easy steps, but you have to have a plan in place to deal with all these things. I don't mean consultants are very valuable. These guys were offended by the fact that consultants up there. I think you have to get more out of them, and I think you have to challenge them more to make sure that the service you're getting is something you can employ and bring value to the table. Everything's a challenge, as I said. Companies, we've experienced that. Some of you have seen it in the headlines. We had the misfortune of having Hawaii Tel on our books when it went bad. Fairpoint on our books when it bad. Acquisitions with significant integration challenges that, and I think Leo made reference to it, can be very challenging. So any change can be challenging. Bankers understand that. We try to plan for it. We can't get it right 100% either. But I think that everybody needs to be cognizant of the challenges that any situation that you may be doing brings to the table. So I'm going to go through the summary basically. CoBank's committed to the business. It's part of our charter. We're committed to rural America. These businesses are rural. We've had a lot of success with these businesses over 20 plus years, lending to them. We do have maybe a more critical eye than some, and doesn't mean we're always going to be a right, but we're providing capital. We're going to be stakeholders, so we're going to take maybe a little more cautious view, but we're still doing these things today. We talked about it a little bit this morning's panel, that there was a time where banks lent 15 plus years. And then in my 16 years in the bank, it came down to 12, came to 10, came to 8. Now we're somewhere between 5 and 8 on the traditional business, just because it's changed that much, and you don't have our confidence level in terms of longevity has changed. Also, the amount of debt the banks have historically provided on this business has changed dramatically. It used to be probably around 6 times. Today, and when I say 6 times your annualized cash flow. And today it's probably 2 to 3 times your annualized cash flow. So the business has changed dramatically, but it doesn't mean that we're walking away from it, or any banks are walking away from it. It just means they're much more cautious, and it means that the onus is put on us to be much more diligent in how we lend to the business, because as I indicated earlier, this business has gone through a long period of time where all you had to do is just show up and ask for some money, and the banks would give you the money, but that has certainly changed. And I thank you.
Good afternoon. Folks, we got the rest of the afternoon together. We're going to have to liven up a little more than that. Good afternoon. All right, much better. Keep that in mind when the Q&A session comes up. So, I'm Bernie Arneson with Pivot. I'm a principal there, and we are a marketing strategy research consultancy to the telecom industry. And I echo my fellow panelists' thanks to both NTCA and the AMAC Council for putting this on. I used to be a member of the AMAC Council. I certainly recognize the hard work they do to bring these types of programs to NTCA meetings. So thanks for making me a part of that. So what I'm going to do for my talk is shift gears a little bit, spend less time talking about banking and regulatory and business issues and focus more on services. And so when we talk about monetizing your network, what does that look like from a service perspective, from the services that you offer? And at the end of the day, that's really what when you say the term monetize your network, that's really what we're getting at, is what services over that network are you offering, and how do you best monetize them and more importantly, profit from them. And so, as you think about that, one of the things that a recurring theme from previous two speakers, as well as we did this session this morning, is we've got to start as an industry looking beyond just our core incumbent territory. We've got to get beyond just the last mile. The last mile is obviously a huge part of the business and will continue to be, but it's not the only part of the business. And as we get into a broadband IP world, last mile gives you the ability, or I should say in a broadband IP world, you have the ability to broaden your horizons, to look at things more holistically. Things like middle mile transport, things like the cloud, we're going to talk about that. And also, when you talk about monetizing a network, think about your people, think about your expertise. How can you utilize and leverage all of those things to create more revenue and create more profitability? So the goal here, when you start looking at end customers, be they business customers or be they consumer customers, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is capture as much technology wallet spend, and I'll define what I mean by that in a second. Capture as much of that spend as possible. Customers are going to buy the types of services we're talking about. They are going to buy those services from someone. And your goal is to make sure that someone is you and not your competitors. So when I talk about technology wallet spend, let me ask this question. How many folks in the room consider yourself a telephone company? Raise your hand up high. A few. How many consider yourself a broadband company? Okay, good to see that transition happening. I would go a step further and say, consider yourself a technology company. And good, I see a few folks already believe that as well. Because again, at the end of the day, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about how consumers spend money. They have a finite amount of money every month, right? And if you rank where that money goes, first and foremost, it goes to shelter, mortgage or rent. Second typical largest expense in U.S. households is an automobile. Third is food. And the fourth is technology. And by technology, I mean wireless, cable, communications, entertainment, gadgets, apps, all of that stuff rolled up into one. They're spending that's a significant amount of money every month. And so your mission is capturing as much of that spend as possible. I referenced some facts here from a recent research report that I read. It talks about, when you look at the average household, there are now 7 broadband connected devices in that home. And that means things like PCs and laptops connected to a network, a local area network within their home. Increasingly, that's becoming other things. That's becoming tablets, that's becoming smartphones, that's becoming televisions, that's becoming game consoles, on and on and on. Basically, just about every consumer electronic device manufactured now has a communications chip in it. I was at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year, back in January, where they were talking about washing machines. Washing machines on display now with Wi-Fi chips. Dryers with Wi-Fi chips. Refrigerators with Wi-Fi chips. We've heard about that stuff in the past. Well, it's here. It's real. And that creates an opportunity for companies like you, because all of that connectivity within the house needs to be managed. And many people do not have the time nor inclination to do that. They just want it to work. They want it to do the things that they get enjoyment out, and that's where you come in. How do you set that up for the first time, and then how do you manage it for them? There's money to be made there. 17% of households now subscribe to TV and internet alone, meaning they have no landline. That number is growing. I think we can all relate to that. 30% of households spend $10 a month or more on online backup services, meaning they like to create all kinds of interesting things with those gadgets. Photos, music, home videos, you name it. Those things, they don't want to lose them. They're treasured mementos, so they're spending money to make sure they're saved and not corrupted and not lost. Again, another great example of how a company like yours can make money at that. So what I tried to do here is put together a little action plan. When you talk about monetizing your network, how do you practically do that? What are the things, what are the steps you need to take to do that? I'm going to break these down. This is a summary, and then we'll go into a little more detail here. First and foremost, we want to vigorously defend your core services. Those core services I label as voice and broadband, and if you happen to be a video provider, you want to defend that as well. By doing that, you need to better understand customer needs, better understand your competitors and their capabilities, and then proactively adapt based on those inputs. And I will outline some of that here in a second. Secondly, you want to layer a variety of apps over your network. Some people call them apps, some people call them services, some people call them features. We're all talking about the same thing. And the way I look at these things are, these are hooks. These are hooks that you want to insert into your customer. And the more hooks that you have in your customer, the harder it is for that customer to leave. So if you're selling that customer a broadband service, a video service, a home networking service, a home monitoring service, a data backup service, think of all the extra revenue that creates, but that also makes it much more difficult for that customer to leave you when and if a competitor comes calling. Lastly, when we talk about all of the things we're talking about here have to be sold, right? You have to create a marketing message so that people understand what you offer and are compelled to buy it from you. That's what marketing is about. And one of the things we see, we do a lot of work with telephone companies and marketing, is marketing today by a lot of folks is done from a product perspective. We're marketing a bunch of different products. And what I'm going to suggest to you is to change that equation a little bit and market an experience. Market and sell an experience. For example, lots of folks focus on, when they talk about broadband, what is their speed of broadband? Well, we offer a 10 megabit pipe, or we offer a 20 megabit pipe. Customer research will tell you customers don't even know what that means. They don't know the difference between 10 megabit or 20 megabit or 50 megabit. What they do understand is, what does that do for me? What experience does that enable for me? How does that make my life better? How does it make me more productive? How do I get entertained more from that? And that's the message that you need to be conveying with your marketing. So let's break these down a little further. So we talk about defensive core services, and let's start with voice. Everyone in the room recognizes that access lines have declined. You know, no great revelation there. We tend to think that what we see too often, unfortunately, is a lot of concern about that, but very little action to address it. In other words, if you're just offering the same POTS service that you have over the past 5-10 years, and expecting that something different is going to happen. Isn't that the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing but expecting different results. So what we're advocating is that you inject some innovation into that voice product. There are a lot of interesting things that you can do with voice these days to make it a much more valuable product to your customers. Take a look at companies like Verizon with Verizon Fios digital voice. Look at what AT&T is doing with UVerse voice. Look at what SureWest is doing with their digital voice. Look at what Cincinnati Bell is doing with their smart home voice service. There's all kinds of examples out there that will illustrate that you have to take a different approach for voice if you want a different result. Additionally, we have to recognize everybody isn't going to want that fabulous new innovative voice product. There are some people who, quite frankly, don't see value in voice and probably never will. Or I should say, see value in voice from a different provider, be that a wireless provider or cable or what have you. One trend that we're seeing as well is a scaled down version of voice. Something very simple, something that's there's a company doing incoming calls only and access to 911, for example. There are other examples of kind of a refined lifeline service. I know there's some regulatory changes that may impact what that looks like in the future, but the message is take a look at your voice product and do something with it. Because if all it is POTS, then just put up the white flag right now. Because even look at the term POTS. Plain, old, telephone service. Who in the heck wants that? Nobody wants to buy something that's plain and old, right? We want something new and innovative. The other things you can do with voice that we think are very important, wherever possible, integrate that voice service with wireless, with mobile. When I say this, a lot of folks respond back to me and say, well, we don't have a wireless company. We don't own wireless, so we can't integrate with wireless. Well, that's not necessarily true. If you own a soft switch, or if you're going to get a soft switch, most soft switches today have the type of integration that allows you to integrate into anybody's wireless service. So that you have a kind of a tightly integrated product, your voice product with a wireless company's voice product. Things like unified messaging, simultaneous ring, find me, follow me types of services that allow your customers to interact with your voice service through their wireless connection and vice versa. So leverage those assets to the extent that you can. So that's it on voice. Let's talk about broadband. I gave this away, my core message here just a second ago. It's less about speed, how much speed you offer, and more about the applications you are enabling. Does your product allow customers to do what they want to do with broadband? So you don't want to sell a pipe, you want to sell an experience, a lifestyle. I want to pull up an example here. So this is Verizon Fios, the main landing page for their Fios service, probably recognized as the preeminent broadband service in America. Gets the most coverage. It's a fiber to the home product. They're doing some really great things, really interesting things with it. And so when you go to their site, first thing I noticed when I went to this site, nowhere on there do they talk about speed. Nowhere on there do they talk about how fast this service is, which by the way can go up to 100 megs. What they are doing is they're relating it in ways that customers understand. They're relating it by photo uploads, gaming, movie downloads, music downloads, file sharing, types of experiences and lifestyle that people use with broadband. So there's something to learn there. So what you do once you've established your message and you're marketing it well, what do? You layer services on top of it. Layer applications over that pipe and make your broadband service sticky. Again, insert those hooks. So what are some of those hooks? Let's take a look at a couple of them. Home business security monitoring. We've talked about that somewhat already today. I'm sure, this is not the only industry conference that's been discussing this, with good reason, because it is a very compelling and promising service. It is one of the best ways, a best example of how to monetize, quote unquote, monetize a broadband pipe. That quote you see there in the second bullet point was told to me by a GM from a rural telco, much like the folks represented in this room. Great margins, it's like printing money. You can't get any better quote than that. Obviously, that experience will not apply everywhere. Every company has a unique situation, but just a great illustration of the promise here. So I wanted to kind of demonstrate, I subscribe to a similar service. Give you an example of the power of this stuff. So here's what you see here is, as soon as it comes up, this is a live shot of my backyard. And it's hard to see on the screen for everybody. You can see that the wind has blown over some furniture there. But there's a door right below there that gets into the back of my house. And this service allows me to basically monitor my home from anywhere, wherever I have a broadband connection. I have an application on my phone. I can pull it up on my phone. I can pull it up on a tablet. I can pull it up on a computer. If there is something that comes into that screen, some type of motion, it will send me a text message to notify me that something's happening at my house. And then it will record for the next 60 seconds. And I can then pull that video up if I couldn't get to it right away, and also have evidence. So, that's a pretty compelling product, something that people are willing to pay for. And it's not just about security, because in many parts of the country where you guys serve, security may not be as important as it is in urban territory, but it's more also about monitoring children, monitoring pets, monitoring other things in the home, and also about the ability to control the home, as Leo talked about, the ability to remotely program thermostats, remotely turn on and off lights, remotely unlock and lock doors. There's just a fabulous amount of applications that this enables, and again, most importantly, applications that people are willing to pay for. And with your pipe, you are now in a position to offer them. So there's some case studies there, just of examples of what some companies are doing that you can read in your book. Here's another great one, home networking management. How many folks doing this presently offer some type of home networking service that you're charging for? Just a couple. Hopefully in a couple of years we'll see more hands go up, because again, here's another great opportunity, I believe. If you remember what I said earlier, average home has 7 connected devices, and that number is going only up, and pretty quickly. And consumers are not, well versed in how to set all that up. So that creates an opportunity for you to not only go in there the first time and set it up, but also manage it over time. There's a lot of great tools out there that allow you to look into that home network remotely if there is a problem, and figure out what's causing the problem, and even remotely fix it. Again, a service that customers are willing to pay for. Here is again, another example of a company like many of you in the room in terms of size and scope. Been offering a managed service. They charge $10 a month for this service, and that's a direct quote from the GM. Surprised at the response. 25% of their broadband customers are now buying the service from them. So there's an additional $10 a month from a quarter of their broadband customers
enabled by their broadband network. And I assume that number will grow over time. Over-the-top video, depending on your perspective, this is a good thing or it could be a bad thing. If you're an existing video provider, I'm sure this is not something that you might not be as encouraged by what I'm going to talk about. But if you're not a video provider, I think we're approaching a point where some type of over-the-top video offer begins to make sense. If you can integrate local off-air channels in with an over-the-top experience and deliver it in a way that makes a nice user interface that people can understand and integrate with, you might have a business there. And you might be able to get into this is one way to potentially get into the video business without the expense and headache that traditional IPTV or cable has offered. This is more on the bleeding edge. It's not something we see a ton of right now, but I suspect in the next year or so you'll begin to see an over-the-top video package that providers like you can offer that's either tied to a faster broadband speed or even some type of subscription model where customers are paying you, a monthly fee. Certainly not the same fee they would pay for a traditional subscription video package, but nevertheless a monthly fee that you can leverage. Another example of potentially monetizing your broadband pipe. So let's talk cloud. Cloud is, probably an overhyped term at this point. Just about everything, every time somebody talks about the network, you're hearing the term cloud. And in some ways, that describes what it is, because the cloud really is, when you hear the reference cloud, what they're referring to is network, is what's in the network. And cloud services allow you or other service providers to offer a variety of applications and services in your network, and your customers can access those services via your network. And it saves them the time, expense, and money, time, expense, and human resource of setting up that capability on their own. So instead of buying the servers and the software and the people to run it, they simply rent or lease that capacity or those services from a company like yours. And they access it through your network in the quote-unquote cloud. Now, most of this early on cloud opportunity resides with the business sector. So businesses are using services like I have listed in this slide: hosted email, hosted unified communications, hosted voice over IP, data storage, data backup. All of these services are, hosted email, for example. They can either buy a hosted email package, hosted email service from a cloud provider, or they can invest in everything they need technology-wise, hardware-wise, software-wise, people-wise to offer email services to their employees and their company. So it's all about, it's an efficiency play. It's how can I get these services more efficiently and with less cost and better impact my bottom line as a business. From a consumer perspective, the cloud is also a growing and important feature, or growing and important application. Consumers are now beginning to understand the benefit of the cloud thanks to companies like Apple and Google and Amazon, doing a great job of basically educating customers as to the value that the cloud brings to them. And that raises expectations for you as a service provider, because they're going to begin to demand these types of cloud services from you, or if not from you, from someone who can provide them either over top of you or instead of you. So, these are issues that you need to really stay on top of, really understand what the impact is. I believe at the end of the day it's more of an opportunity than a threat, but it's going to require that you understand the issues and seize those opportunities when they become available. There's no shortage of promising products when we talk about monetizing the network. Other services, other applications you can offer. I obviously didn't have time to go over all of them. Here's a few more in your book there when you talk about small SMB as small and medium businesses. Small and medium businesses have a lot of needs, and they are willing to pay for those needs to be met. And I think that that's a growing opportunity for the telcos in the room to better understand the needs of small and medium business and extract more revenue out of them than just selling them phone service and a T1 or broadband, DSL, what have you. Managed LAN services, file backup and storage, parental controls, again, on and on and on. Brings up the need for, and I'll talk about this I think in the Q&A, brings up the need of looking at some of your employee assets, and do you have the people in place that can make this type of thing, make these types of things happen with your customers? Do you have the product managers that are going to be necessary to manage this product life cycle? So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. I have to admit I was mesmerized by the display of the backdoor shot. I was terrified that I was going to see somebody running out with like a large screen TV in their hand. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. Stop. No, now we're going to open it up for some discussion. Do we have any questions from the floor? Kind of like Rob said, get more out of your consultants. Here's your opportunity. Okay, well, I'll start us off. Bernie, you discussed, I guess, a lot of different products in your presentation. Could you elaborate more on those products and their roles for the telcos?
Yeah, sure. So I think that products are extremely important. It's kind of a different way of looking at things. I mean, in the past, you've offered products, obviously. They may not have been looked at as products, probably more looked at like services. But the world we're heading in now, where you need to create you need to extract as much revenue out of your network as possible, means the concept of product development becomes much more important. You need to be developing products and services. And when I mentioned in that just briefly there, that means, the concept of a product manager within a telco, I think, is something that's going to become much more important from a human resource perspective, from a title perspective. Having product managers at the company whose job is to manage the product life cycle, the implementation, the execution, basically becoming the advocate for that given product within the company to ensure that it's executed well, is going to become very important. I mean, the introduction of product managers are going to become very important, and the introduction of products, as we've all been talking about, is going to become extremely important. And I would also add, when you do something like that, when we move into this world, one of the things I think that the telco industry has to be okay with is the idea of failure. In the past, we haven't embraced failure too well. But when you start rolling out products at the pace that we're talking about, every product is not going to be successful. And you got to be okay with that. You got to be able to take risks and recognize that failure is going to come. But that's the world we live in. When you look at other companies, especially in the communication space, some of these Web 2.0 companies, they launch new products almost weekly. And they know that the majority of them are not going to make it. Now, I'm not suggesting that's what telcos need to become, far from it. But I do think we have to be much more open to product development, product managers, risk, and failure associated with those products.
Can I make a comment? You know, I would think that product development is a perfect application for partnerships or joint ventures. I mean, to the degree that you can share in the cost and the time to develop a product that you can universally deploy across a state or across a region of the country. I don't know, a lot of the security systems people are deploying now is coming from a template that Comporium in South Carolina put together, and they franchised it essentially. They said, here's the ready-made product, you know, go and put it in your installation. And so I think that is a concept that lends itself well to a partnership structure and a shared risk and shared reward.
Yes, right here.
Well, first of all, Bernie, I guess the guy sitting on your left would probably disagree with the risk of failure is okay. But are there some accepted industry templates for personnel? Let's say we wanted to get into a cloud-based applications, data storage, backup, whatever it may be, for staffing. So, you know, it's great to have a product manager to dream up those products, but you won't sell, you may sell a lot at first, but if you can't support it, and that's a big, you know, element of the ongoing cost to run it, then you're going to lose money, right? If you don't have enough people there to keep it running properly. So, long way around to get to this question. So, are there industry templates that you, as a consultant or part of a consulting firm, have that can help telcos that, look, you have so many subs and you want to get into Microsoft 365, here's how many technicians per sub that you'll need.
Yeah, so we're supposed to repeat that question. Let me make sure I
So
paraphrase.
the question is, is there templates out there to help companies like ours get into cloud-based services?
I think the question is, how do you properly size your operation with number of staff based on the service, the market you're, you know, where do you get the guidance of how many CSRs or how many technicians or whatever you need?
Right, to make the business model really accurate before you go ahead and buy all this stuff and, you know, put 2 feet in the water, you really want to know what are my costs. Do I need 1 tech, 3 techs, 5 techs? How do you size it properly so you can build the right business?
Well, you know, my company doesn't offer that, but, you know, you got my wheels spinning now. You know, maybe next year I'll have a different answer. But I think that, you know, it's an excellent point in that you don't want to go into things blind, and you want some counsel, and you want some, you know, it's always great where people have gone down the path, and you can learn from their mistakes, and you can, you know, apply lessons learned type of approach. As to whether there is a, you know, a defined template for specific services, I think that might be a little bit of a stretch, but I do think there's probably, you know, some great lessons learned and some great examples from companies that have gone down the road that we're talking about that we could, you know, apply what they've learned in terms of resources, human resources, and other, and operational, you know, operational best practices to give you some knowledge and give you some comfort in moving forward.
When we develop business plans, it's easy with the ILEC business because, you know, you have roughly 800 operating companies out there. You can look at, you know, their clients, so you can look at how many people they have by service, by function. For the new generation of services, if they're public companies, it's relatively easy to find information. You can go to 10K reports. There's always industry presentations that they make, not only to a group like this, there's board presentations they make, there's investor presentations they do. In fact, we're working on a project right now where we went to 6 public publicly traded company site, and we pull down the number of employees. Now, we don't get it to the nth degree by exact function, but it gives us a pretty good indication that if you have X number of subscribers, here's generally the number of employees that you have, and then you can scale it down to whatever operation or size that you're looking at. So it's not exact, but it will give you a pretty good indication of what your size should be.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of these services sort of make an assumption that you have an educated consumer, a consumer that understands the service and benefits and so forth. And so, how do you propose that we sort of mass educate, our consumers, even businesses, as to the values inherent in these products?
The question is, how do you educate the end user?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and one response I have to that is that when I talked about, are you a technology company? I think there's a great way to establish yourself as a technology company, and that is consumer education and basically leading your customers to some of these services, making them understand the value of these services. And I know there's a great legacy of that with this industry already in terms of training at the community level, computer training and other types of training activities that you've done. I just see this as a natural extension of that, and that is to lead customers towards these products and services, and that cements you as the technology leader within the community. So I look at that as a great opportunity to provide some thought leadership, if you will, around these services and help educate and train. It's also a great point. One of the things I think you have to do as you roll out products like this is, from a marketing perspective, you have to demonstrate them. Because you're right, a lot of the products and services that we're talking about, people don't really see the value until they actually touch it, feel it, see it, play with it, demo it. And so where you have the opportunity to do that, whether it's the local business office, whether it's events, if you have any type of retail presence, all of those opportunities, those touch points with customers, giving them the ability to touch, feel, play with these products, demo these products is important. And so I think that, again, is an opportunity to lead them in that direction.
I think the great benefit we have is that they're going to find out whether you educate them or not. You have, thank God we had Steve Jobs for whatever time. I mean, they're going to bring, your customer is going to bring you to the applications. And the question is, and as Bernie said earlier, you want to be the one that provides the solution, not giving it off to someone else, another competitor. They may not be sophisticated in exactly how to use the technology, but they know about it. They have to be living under a rock to not know about some of these things. It's up to the local company to develop the service, deliver the service, and as Bernie says, give touch points to allow people to see what you're offering to offer that solution to the subscriber, because they want that service. They want entertainment. People are willing to pay for service and entertainment, and we just have to develop and provide it to them.
Well, I don't think there's a specific number, but what we see, you pretty much have to have 10,000 customers off very few head-ends. You can't have hundreds of head-ends to do that. So, and that's, unfortunately, that continues to kind of work against you as programming year in and year out goes up, and so that's back to what these guys are talking about, selling more and more services and raising the average revenue per unit. But yeah, I think in that world, we don't get too excited unless they have at least 10,000 customers off of one or two head-ends.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question for Leo and Rob. It has to do with, if you're looking at partnerships and new business opportunities, when you look at some of the, restrictions we have on loan covenants, whether they're with RUS or CoBank, you're looking at leveraging these things. How do you go about, structuring those and, just evaluating those going forward if you need to go out and secure capital under a partnership scenario like that? Can you just talk a little bit about some of the things you should be thinking about when you look at these opportunities?
Your money, you go ahead.
Well, if I understood the question is that as your business evolves, I might be, if I don't get it quite right, jump in, but as the business evolves, and this business clearly is evolving much faster and more so than it ever has, how do you continue to access capital markets and can you have, what do you need to do to structure the deal the way you need to have it structured so you can take advantage of the opportunities, roughly?
No, I'm talking more about if, say, for example, you were looking at going into a partnership with 2 or 3 other companies, and you each individually have your own, mortgage, requirements, covenants, restrictions, but within the partnership, you're going to have to raise capital. Now, whether that's all through equity or, third-party, financing, what's kind of the process you need to think about as you're looking at that from the perspective of the lender?
Well, okay, I'll take it from the perspective that whatever the partnership is viable on its own. So it's an enterprise, and when the bank would come in and finance that specific enterprise. So let's say it's an acquisition or a construction project, which would actually, we start with acquisition. Then your current lender would have to give you latitude to make a distribution for the equity component of that. Typically, there wouldn't be ongoing guarantees, but it depends on if it's a startup or not a startup. If the enterprise stood on its own with the combination of the equity contributed and the debt provided, then there wouldn't be any ongoing guarantees. But we all know that some of these projects are actually construction startup projects that require ongoing guarantees. That way, but in that case, you're going to have to get some latitude from your incumbent lender to allow you to do that. Hopefully, in the best scenario would be that your incumbent lender likes the project and is willing to finance it on a standalone basis with support for a period of time. And so there's a lot of coordination there. If you have 3 partners and you have 3 different lenders, it'd be ideal to have the same lender at all 3, and then that lender provide the partnership, the capital it needs.
My guess is that Rob would love to see a business plan for a new venture that's going to be accretive to the bottom line of the partners. So I think they'll be very supportive of that. Now, the one thing that in negotiations with your lender, you're not going to relieve them of their first position at your operating company now, but you certainly don't want to also take on the risk of the value you have in your parent company at the subsidiary. You'd like them to stand alone as much as possible, and if it is supportive in its own, based on the projections, based on the business, then you have loans there, and it'll be supportive by the operations. Now, you might have to kick in equity, which you probably will have to kick in equity, but I think it's very easy for it to stand alone as an operation, have its own capital structure, its own debt, and not interfere with your existing operations.
I have a question then. Go along with that, I think we all realize that we're going to see an increase in consolidation going forward. I think a lot of this discussion today has been about that. And I'll start with Leo. Leo, why do you feel that, or what gets in the way of, or the top reasons that it's so hard for companies to collaborate together?
Thanks, Steve.
Partner and work together.
I said earlier that mine will not be a politically correct answer. I think, first of all, if you can identify like parties of interest that have common goals and common issues to deal with, it's very natural to work together to find solutions and partner on various things. It could be an acquisition, it could be a development of a network, whatever it is. Remember, the premise is our revenue streams are changing and we need to increase our revenues with these other services, and we need to control our operating expenses. Very good, very common, very logical. What gets in the way, honestly, is ego, politics, and self-interest. You know, companies don't want to give up control. They don't want to give up board seats. They don't want to give up management positions. It is just a very common element, and not just in this industry. Most deals that do not get done is not because of the business sense. If there was enough business sense to bring people to the table, it's because the egos in the room couldn't let the deal get done. I've made several presentations. I called it, Who Will Be Maximus? Who saw the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe? I'm assuming some of you have. The Maximus was Russell Crowe. He was a general in the Roman army, and he was, you know, for a series of things, he was put in jail. He wanted to buy his freedom, and so he had a meeting with a senator, and he told the senator, if you buy my freedom, I will go to the north, get my armies, come back and overthrow the dictator. And so the senator says to him, so I'm just going to trade one dictator for another. He says, no, I'll leave the army to protect the Senate and I'll leave. He was willing to sacrifice himself for the greater good of Rome. Corny analogy, but that's the analogy. Who amongst us here are willing to give up the trip to San Diego, the benefits that we get, the things, the nice dinners and all that? I mean, in reality, are we willing to give that up for the better of the long-term prospect of the company? It's a hard question to ask and an even harder question to answer. So, Steve putting me on the spot, thank you. That's the answer. The people in this room are the reason it doesn't get done. And that's managers, directors, key employees, communities. I'll let someone else embarrass themselves.
Can I just add something to that? I agree with Leo 100% on that. I think the other thing that we've discovered is that some of these partnerships get pretty old, and there's not an exit strategy. I think various partners change their ideas, they deviate from what they want, or their plans just change and their needs change. One of the things we see is that over the long haul is how to break up a partnership, or how do some partners monetize while others go on is another factor that needs to be considered. And a lot of times we don't think about that because we never think about the ending of a partnership. We just think about the beginning of it. But generally all partnerships do come to an end, and the divorce component of it needs to be understood and mapped out.
These two gentlemen are much more versed in that topic than I, but I'll just say it was actually a subject of breakfast conversation I had this morning, is that I think we all recognize that consolidation is a reality of this industry, not just the rural telecom industry, but the telecom industry. Consolidation is a reality, partnering is a reality, and a necessity. What it really boils down to is when. Right? Are we going to do it when times are relatively calm and you have the ability to control the outcome somewhat, or are you going to wait until you're forced because market conditions have created it to the point where there is no other option and you no longer have control, and it becomes a real ugly situation for all involved? And that's, I think, an issue that this industry needs to really look at. Is I think we can all see the writing on the wall. It's a matter of how are we going to manage that, and are we going to do it in a way that's we've got some control over, or are we going to wait until it's forced upon us?
I can understand the plant or the product manager concept if I'm in a company with 60 people and I pick out a few people. One person manages virtual PBX, another manages cable TV, another manages wireless. Can you shave that down to a company of 9 people where you have a GM, one salesman,
Somebody from the peanut gallery said hire consultants, but I'm not going to go there. No, I understand your valid question, and the question was, just to repeat, is how do you apply this product manager, product development approach to smaller companies where you don't have the head count and you don't have the luxury of putting people in charge of one or two products. And you know, no easy answer to that other than to say smaller companies historically, people within that company wear multiple hats already. And what it really boils down to is look at what the legacy hats are, and can they be changed and adapted into the current marketplace and the future marketplace. So some of those multiple hats may change, and rather than doing some of the things they've done in the past, they now do product management and are responsible for product management. I think that's kind of the easiest way to address that, is that your people will have to adapt to this environment, and that's going to include a product management role. And hopefully, when that happens, we're taking away something from that employee as well. We're not just adding, but we're adapting and changing.
You don't mean benefits, not taking away benefits, correct?
No.
Because one of your slides up there talked about reducing headcounts, and we all know this, but that's the advice that we're getting. We're trying to, we've held our headcount steady, we've expanded our product line, we've expanded our network, our plant. I'm not asking you for a solution to that. Product management just seems to be like it's going to be hard. We already have a line installer that's the product manager of our key system installations. He has trouble telling the plant supervisor how to run that product. Anyway, that's not a question.
Any other questions? I have one, and it goes back to the very first of Leo's presentation, and it deals with all the regulatory change that's coming, being forced from the FCC, and how that's going to change the business model for telcos going forward. Would Leo, Rob, either one of you, would y'all like to take a stab at that?
I'll take a stab. You know, there's just no question our world has changed, and it will not go backwards. It's going to continue to put pressure on us from an operating standpoint, from a revenue standpoint, from a margin standpoint. We no longer have a guaranteed return as we once did. So as you model your business, and even to what the gentleman is saying with his product managers, you have to make sure you have the right amount of staff for the right number of customers, for the right services. I mean, you can really do an analysis of companies and say, for the number of revenue generating units, how many employees do you have? And you can come to what is probably a reasonable number to make sure you're not overstaffed or understaffed. It's going to be a change for us to make sure that we run as efficiently as possible, and we develop these new revenue sources, but we have the capability to do it. Remember, it goes back to your number one asset. I mean, people are a great asset, but you have a network that's superior to none, that, or superior to all. And thank you. I was trying to think of the phrase. And then you have the capacity to operate it and expand it and use it, and that's what we have to do. We're going to have to rely on more revenues for the services we sell, and not on the regulated business. There's just no way to get around it. We don't have a choice. As the money guy, you got to say something.
Well, I talked about it a little bit. I mean, bottom line is business is changing. Your business is changing. Your RGUs are changing. How you approach the business, how you sell the business. That's kind of what we've all talked about here. I think I agree with Leo. These are the best networks in rural America. We just need to continue to look for ways to monetize them. And we're going to probably monetize them differently tomorrow than we did today, and a year from now, and so on. And I think that size is going to continue to put pressure on you. I think it's going to be hard to have specialized people doing certain things if you don't have the RGUs to support that. So you either have to find, as Leo mentioned in his presentation, ways to leverage off your neighbors or your region or your state or whatever to I guess cut some of the costs associated with the more traditional like things that you share with your brethren out there. And that way you can put more resources into more specialized jobs that are driven to make revenue and create customers and make revenue.
At that point, Rob, I got a question. With trying to extend broadband out into rural America, as a lender at that point, isn't that tough? Trying to make that investment out there, being able to win dollars on plant that might not be a return.
Yeah, it is. I think we wouldn't advocate that you do that. I think geography topography plays a role. East company is more dense than West companies, and so I think you can do that maybe in the eastern part of the U.S. Probably can't in the western part of the U.S. So first of all, I think you have to build your core, and then I think you use other technologies, wireless, satellite, and maybe in some cases under this new regulatory environment, some of those people in the extremely rural areas are not going to get service. Or maybe you go with the water and energy platform, where in that world, if you live outside our service territory, especially in water and sewer, the end user pays the freight to get the product to their home. It's not the way it is today, and I'm not advocating that's the way it's going to be, but it has to be reasonable. And if there's not a reasonableness to it, and you can't recover on it, the end user's not going to pay you enough in a monthly service. And what's even worse, if you build it out there, let's say they drop the service after 90 days. That's a pretty expensive attempt to win a customer.
Well, something you just mentioned, I want to move this to Bernie for a second. Something he was talking about, wireless and Wi-Fi. What's the significance of Wi-Fi in telco networks, and how should it be leveraged today?
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of Wi-Fi. I look at Wi-Fi as just a natural extension of your broadband network. And we're talking about how important your network is, and that's your core asset, and Wi-Fi allows you to extend that core asset even further. So I think all telcos need to be in the Wi-Fi business, no question. And when I say in the Wi-Fi business, what I mean by that is both in the home, helping customers set up Wi-Fi networks within their home. There's definitely a way to make money doing that, I think. But also outside of the home, in terms of wherever you have pockets of density, wherever you can extend and create that broadband experience to your customers, I think is a priority. And it's not always a direct revenue generating opportunity, but it's more about expanding your broadband experience to as many places as possible. Every device, as I talked about, that's being manufactured now, every consumer electronic device for the most part has a Wi-Fi chip in it. Whether that's a phone, a tablet, washing machine, refrigerator, the list goes on and on. And I think you need to be in that business. And I think you need to be in that business more than a potential competitor. And that's, some may disagree with that, but that's where I stand.
Yes, sir.
Bernie, I can't agree with you more, but I think we ought to, cable TV companies are building Wi-Fi networks in their systems, at least in the east hasn't reached out here in the west that I know of yet. They're building Wi-Fi systems so that their customers can use the Wi-Fi. It's free spectrum. We small telcos
That's a very valid point.
Well, and I would say, I agree 100% too, and I would say that those who want to have a wireless play, that's the only way we're going to have wireless play. We're not going to duplicate the mobile wireless networks. We'll never win, we'll never compete, it will drive us out of business, but I think specialized Wi-Fi, absolutely. We have to do that.
We got time for about one more question. Yes.
This is mainly for Rob and Leo again too. Based on your analysis of the USF reform, and as you look out over the horizon, do you see a point where companies in this room should consider simply foregoing the USF and all the regulatory burdens that are going with it and just serve who they can serve to the best of their ability?
You know, if you're prepared to give up the carrier of last resort responsibilities, then you've got to give up the support that goes along with it. I would be hard pressed to advocate someone giving up, you know, it's 60% now, but it might be 40% of their revenue in the next couple of years. I think there comes a point where it's going to go close to zero, and then you're going to be there anyways, but I think the obligations you have are not so onerous that it's worth giving up that support money. I just don't know why you would do that.
I don't really have anything to add to that, but I would agree 100%. I think, especially in the near term, long term, you know, I think your networks are your business is going to change pretty dramatically, and I think there's a possibility of that. But I agree with Leo. Right now, if my customers came in and said we're going to give for USF, I'd be in big trouble.
Do we have there's one right here? One more? Yes.
Well, I don't need to give it if that was the last question.
No. It was quick. So.
I have a question for Rob, and it's hypothetical. You know, if you're a good little company, that's hypothetical.
It's not hypothetical.
If you're a good, strong little company, all the people we're talking about are talking about transition, and that means investing in capital. Is a bank like CoBank and our banks in general willing to maybe renegotiate interest rates and payment terms to help provide capital to those companies to make those transitions?
No on interest rates, and yes on terms. You know, interest rates aren't that high. I mean, currently you can borrow today at less than 5%. And so if interest rates are the roadblock, then your problem's bigger than that. But I understand structure of loans can be a problem because a lot of times amortization starts to kick up and it gets pretty heavy. And if those dollars in our world, if those dollars can be used to grow the business, then we're happy to forego amortization and push it out further and let those dollars be put into capital dollars that grow the business.
What about on existing debts that have higher interest rates?
If they have higher interest rates, then you should be refinanced. It's no different than a house mortgage to me, unless it's locked into a fix somehow that has a counterparty risk to it. But if you have higher interest rates today, and just like anything else, you should have the avenue to take care of that. You should do that.
Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for us today. Thank you for coming. And today, 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 thank you for coming. And